After having won several victories involving higher education, the NAACP set its sights on segregated education at the K-12 level. In 1952, the Supreme Court accepted a case for review that directly addressed that issue. The court heard oral argument, and then went into a private conference to decide the case. But they couldn't come to a consensus by the end of their term in June 1953, and so they decided to reschedule the case for the following term. That was a consequential decision, because in September 1953, Chief Justice Fred Vinson died of a heart attack. He was replaced by the Governor of California, Earl Warren. After Warren was confirmed, the court once again tried to decide Brown v. Board of Education. At their initial conference, there were 6 justices in favor of overturning Plessy v. Ferguson and declaring segregated schools unconstitutional. 3 justices voted to affirm Plessy. Chief Justice Warren had voted to end segregated schools, so he was on the winning side. But merely winning was not enough for him. He wanted a unanimous decision. He wanted a unanimous decision because he knew it would be extremely unpopular in the South, and would engender massive resistance. He hoped that the decision would be more widely accepted if it were unanimous. So he personally lobbied the 3 other members of the court, trying to change their vote. Eventually, he was successful. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court handed down its decision to strike down segregated schools. Despite the fact it was one of the most important decisions the court has ever made, it is extremely short, and has no concurring or dissenting opinions. If you'll recall, one of the main arguments made by the court in Plessy v. Ferguson was the laws separating the races didn't imply that one race was inferior to the other. The court directly refuted this argument in Brown. In its opinion, the court referenced several scientific experiments that had been conducted by sociologists. One of those was the famous doll experiment. Young black and white children were shown a black doll and a white doll. The children were then asked to pick the pretty doll, and to pick the smart doll. They were asked to pick the ugly doll, and the stupid doll. The results showed that when most black children were asked to pick an ugly doll or a stupid doll, they picked the black doll. Based on these studies, and just general common sense, the court wrote, segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored children. The impact is greater when it has the sanction of the law, for the policy of separating the races is usually interpreted as denoting the inferiority of the Negro group. A sense of inferiority affects the motivation of a child to learn. Segregation with the sanction of law, therefore, has a tendency to retard the educational and mental development of Negro children, and to deprive them of some of the benefits they would receive in a racially integrated school system. Whatever may have been the extent of psychological knowledge at the time of Plessy v. Ferguson, this finding is amply supported by modern authority. So the court finally acknowledged the simple reality that the damage caused by racial segregation is not just a figment of the imagination, and it declared that segregated schools violate the Equal Protection Clause. But the case wasn't over. The court established a new constitutional principle, but actually enforcing it would be another matter. The problem of how to desegregate schools is an intensely complicated one, especially because housing segregation resulted in neighborhoods that were overwhelmingly black or overwhelmingly white. It was also a task guaranteed to cause white rage and racial conflict. As a result, although the court declared segregated schools unconstitutional, it allowed them to continue for 1 more year, in order to give the court time to figure out what to do. In 1955, the court issued another ruling, which has come to be known as the Brown II decision. Brown II dealt with the question of how desegregation would actually be achieved. It was not very specific, because it acknowledged the fact that school districts vary significantly from place to place, and that it would be impossible to create one solution that would fit every school district. School districts were ordered to develop plans and submit them to the lower federal courts, who would approve or deny them, and oversee their implementation. The court said that school districts should desegregate with all deliberate speed. This did not happen in many places. Many school districts moved as slowly as possible, and submitted plans that would do little, if anything. For example, many school districts merely changed their policies to allow students to attend any school of their choice. These policies were ineffective, because few white children chose to attend black schools, and few black children chose to attend white schools because they knew they would be attacked and ostracized. More than 100 members of Congress signed a document called the Southern Manifesto, which declared, "The Supreme Court of the United States, with no legal basis for such action, undertook to exercise their naked judicial power and substituted their personal political and social ideas for the established law of the land. We commend the motives of those states which have declared the intention to resist forced integration by any lawful means. We pledge ourselves to use all lawful means to bring about a reversal of this decision, which is contrary to the Constitution, and to prevent the use of force in its implementation." Many Southern politicians put these words into action. For example, the governor of Arkansas called out the National Guard in an attempt to create chaos, and then used that chaos as an excuse to not desegregate the schools. By 1958, the Supreme Court had had enough. It issued an opinion in the case of Cooper v. Aaron that was not only unanimous, but that was written collectively by every member of the court, the only such opinion in Supreme Court history. The court directly addressed the challenges to its authority. The justices wrote, "The basic decision in Brown was unanimously reached by this court only after the case had been briefed and twice argued, and the issues had been given the most serious consideration. Since the first Brown opinion, 3 new justices have come to the court. They are at one with the justices still on the court who participated in that basic decision as to its correctness, and that decision is now unanimously reaffirmed." After this, desegregation started to occur in earnest, but real change didn't come from the court. The main factor that led schools to desegregate was the threat by the federal government to withhold federal education funding from schools that failed to comply. Nevertheless, Brown v. Board stands as an important statement of constitutional principles.